Every year in Ireland, we each produce 17 tonnes of greenhouse gases. That's enough to fill 2 million balloons for each and every one of us. Driving to work, building and heating our homes, powering industry, commerce, food production. Every move we make is backed by energy from fossil fuels. These gases are invisible to the eye, and we took them for granted until we started noticing their effects. Now, there is no avoiding climate change. It is well underway and accelerating. Even if all emissions were halted now, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will go on warming it for centuries. We now have to completely rethink our use of fossil fuels and find solutions before we run out of time to act. This is a daunting task. In this programme, we'll be looking at the impact of climate change in Ireland and asking, are we up to the challenges ahead? Last year was a big year globally for climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change told the world in no uncertain terms how serious the situation is. Their work was rewarded with the Nobel Peace Prize. The EU was the first to lead the way forward and accept its responsibilities. It announced new tough targets of its own. In England, the Stern report to the British government showed that if we act now, it is still possible to make the necessary reductions to limit warming. Water shortages, fires, hurricanes and flooding again made headlines, and glaciers with ice hundreds of thousands of years old continued to melt, shattering all records. We were shocked to see the Northwest Passage melting, enough to become navigable, something we never considered possible. Al Gore also got a Nobel Peace Prize for his contribution, and an Oscar for bringing an inconvenient truth to the big screen.
Global warming is now a reality that even die-hard skeptics find hard to deny. And it looks as though the time frame for solutions is even shorter than we think.
If we do nothing to correct our actions, we can expect a rise of 5 to 6 degrees centigrade across the planet by the end of this century, with devastating consequences.
So how did we get here? Before the Industrial Revolution, our atmosphere contained about 280 parts per million of CO2. This is the level that all life as we know it today evolved and sustained us over time.
The Industrial Revolution was fueled by coal, followed by gas and then oil. It was the magic bullet we had dreamed of, lifting us out of poverty and offering us a bright future. But the sustained energy burn to drive the revolution came at a price. By the time we started keeping a record in the late 50s, we had already pushed the number up from 280 to 315 parts per million. Our massive expansion since the 50s has added a third to what was originally there, and our greenhouse gases are now rising above the 380 mark. Everyone now agrees that 450 parts per million has to be where we should draw the line in the sand. At our current rate, we'll have reached this point within 30 years. We simply can't afford to continue our sustained burn rate of energy because of the risks it brings with it.
If we want to start making changes, we've only a window of 7 years to act before reductions simply become too big for us to take on.
In any case, the gases we've already put up there will continue to have a devastating effect. So we'll have to look at ways of adapting to a new situation.
We made a mistake in the world. It's just how we have evolved because fossil fuels were wonderful and they allowed us to do wonderful things. But nobody anticipated that putting all of these emissions, the carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere would have this effect. The latest report which came out said the science is unequivocal.
Science is now very confident that we're actually changing the nature of the climate system. The climate in the 21st century is going to be quite different from anything we've experienced during the whole period of civilization, 6,000 to 10,000 years. We're pushing into unknown territory. and science cannot always tell you what's going to happen.
The target the European Union have committed us to reflects the size of the problem. We've agreed to reduce our emissions down to minus 30% of what they were in 1990 by 2020. And they propose that we'll further need to get that down to minus 90% by 2050. To meet this target, the programme for government has set a 3% year-on-year reduction starting in 2008. This will move to 5% after 5 years.
Well, we're doing badly because we did already, if you like, get a derogation. We were told that we could go to 13% above 1990 levels. We're way above that now, and we have no hope of actually meeting that particular target. The only way that we will meet our Kyoto targets is by buying carbon credits right now.
Well, Ireland is really a very poor relation in all of this. We got a very generous 13% increase on our 1990 levels in the Kyoto negotiations. And in fact, we are well above that in our emissions.
The EU is committing to a 20% reduction by 2020, and even going beyond that to a 30% reduction by 2020.
So it really is a huge challenge because, as we all know, our emissions have been increasing fairly rapidly. So we're not just going to flatten out, but we're going to have to cut back.
They've set themselves a target of reducing CO2 emissions by 3% every year. Never been achieved in history before by any economy. So you need a sustained national effort with all the stakeholders buying into it.
The good news is that although we've been buying our way out of our obligations, our potential for reducing our greenhouse gases here at home is good. The Celtic Tiger may have skyrocketed our emissions, but it has also given us the money we need to invest in solutions. Now, quite simply, it's payback time.
People need to realise that the lifestyle that we're currently living is unsustainable and it is leading to increased CO2 emissions. And we have a part to play. People need to realise that they are part of that problem and they can offer a solution as well.
We now have no choice but to buy our way out of this problem. Under Kyoto, we will owe for all the greenhouse gases we create above our allocation between 2008 and 2012. The taxpayers shouldn't be asked to pay for this. We've abused this mechanism as a way of avoiding our responsibilities. It has also taken away our only incentive for making real reductions at home. This is taxpayers' money going to pay for the damage being done by fossil fuels. We may be happy to pay it now, but will we still be happy to pay it as the price of carbon rises? Tackling climate change means taking greenhouse gases out wherever we can. Agriculture has twice the global average of emissions because of our huge numbers of cattle and sheep. Large savings could be made by bringing our poor-performing buildings up to standard. And our transport still stands as a record of failure, with so many opportunities for public transport and rail freight wasted.
It is absolutely crazy to have people driving 100 miles, 200 miles per day in single occupancy cars to and from work.
We need leadership on this issue as we've lost so many opportunities through poor infrastructural planning. Locked now into our cars on motorways clogged like arteries, leading to towns at the end of massive commutes, we can rightly look back at all the routes we could have taken to today's Ireland. Now, because of climate change, we will have to redo so much of what we've done.
You can have a climate change strategy, but if people continue to lead unsustainable lifestyles, and if there isn't interdepartmental thinking, if you like, if you have the Department of Transport doing one thing, the Department of Agriculture doing another, then I'm afraid a national climate change strategy won't achieve very much.
People are beginning to accept the science of climate change. They're immediately asking, what can we do about it? They're looking for leadership to solve this problem because the consequences are very severe. Anybody with children wants to hand on a world in as good a shape as we got it.
When you look at China, which is adding the demand equivalent of a Germany every year to an essentially fixed base of production. And you take India, Brazil, Indonesia, Vietnam, Russia, they're adding the equivalent of a France every year to demand on the world. From a fixed base, which is actually, it's a twilight resource. And these people are all doing what we did. They're all getting rich the way we did. This is no longer acceptable. We have to find renewables, and we have to find them quick.
To actually cut emissions at home, we need to reduce waste and inefficiencies and bring online all our renewable energy sources. We have huge natural resources. With the rising price of oil and gas in a shrinking world market, we would have been forced to make the switch out of fossil fuels anyway. Gordon Brown announced his plan to embark on a wind power revolution that will produce enough wind energy to power every home in Britain by 2020. If they can do that in the UK, imagine what we could do here with our natural advantages and greater wind speeds.
And I, for one, delight and revel in the fact that oil has gone so expensive, because only now are people beginning to be motivated. Big business, governments all around the world saying, we cannot be dependent any longer on this source that brought us all our wealth so far. We've got to change. And of course, when humans are facing any challenge, they're brilliant at changing. And we are brilliant at changing. All we need is the motivation.
The market for dealing with climate change internationally will be worth trillions of euro, so it will be big business. Like globalization, it will bring about powerful changes in our economic landscape over time. But changing our habits, our technologies, and our economy will be incredibly hard. We need to do everything all at once, and there's no blueprint for a collective effort of this kind. But if we can do it, there are huge long-term gains.
It allows you to build a stable economy. This is the thing about sustainability that people haven't caught on to yet. It allows you to build a sustainable economy, or one that you can actually predict the prices in the future. So it makes absolute business sense for this country to go hell for leather in getting these natural resources incorporated into our production system.
What we need to do is put a high enough price on carbon to send a signal to the user. This is the polluter pays principle.
The main instrument is not being used, and that is the charging for the damage. It's almost ironic, really, that you don't charge somebody for doing damage, and yet they are doing damage when they emit carbon to the atmosphere.
We need to bring this carbon levy in now and gradually raise the price yearly to make it both acceptable and achievable. It would deal with the poor who would otherwise be left exposed. Furthermore, this fund could be ring-fenced and recycled into solutions to actually bring down our emissions. It would also pay for our Kyoto obligations without drawing from needed tax revenue.
The essential thing about a carbon levy is that it sends a very strong signal to people that their use of energy is going to be taxed. If they buy bigger cars, it will cost them more. If they use more energy, it will cost them more. So it's an economic signal, and all the economists say that it does affect behaviour.
If you buy a very, very carbon efficient car, you'd pay no VRT at all. If you use a very, very carbon intensive car, you'd pay a much higher VRT than at present. Likewise, the annual tax, if we make it carbon-based, will shift the fleet composition. Remember, most cars turn over in about 5 years. So with that kind of very, very strong signal at the outset, I think we can really move performance quite a bit. My sense is we're kind of at a tipping point. The programme for government is very interesting. It has many ambitious, not just targets, but also mechanisms for getting there, including a carbon levy. I get the sense business are kind of ready for it. The public are gradually orienting themselves. We realise we're very dependent on very vulnerable imports. It'll only take one kind of mad event in the Middle East to give us a huge spike or supply interruption. So I think the time is right, actually. And once we as a people turn our minds to something and say we're really going to do it, once we get a price signal that says it pays to do it, we can do it.
If we don't contain our CO2, global temperatures will reach a tipping point, where any action then will be put beyond the capabilities of civilization. This is the runaway effect, and signs of its presence are out there.
People have never faced the temperatures that we're going to face this century. But the last time the planet was a few degrees warmer than now was 125,000 years ago. So we know the planet can do it. We know that there's nothing preventing the planet from being warmer.
What has happened in science in 2007 has moved outside the range of anything we had in previous models for climate change. This tells us that effects like melting Arctic ice, the acidification of the oceans, loss of rainforest, and melting permafrost are all feeding extra greenhouse gases back into the system.
You know, if you want to look at the immediate effects of climate change, because we're living in a world of climate change right now, you know, you go to the Arctic and that's where it's happening. As ice starts to retreat because the oceans warm up a little bit, you get a positive feedback occurring. You get the ice retreats, get less reflection, you get a dark ocean, which is absorbing all the energy coming in from the sun and turning it into heat. You know, in 2007, we saw the Arctic summer ice extent drop to 20% below the previous record, which had been in 2005. What's happened in 2007 has probably now moved outside the range of anything we had in our models. That sort of tells you something that the positive feedback is going faster than we thought it might.
Another of the effects we're concerned about is the rate of melting tundra permafrost. This is basically a massive frozen peat bog containing billions of tons of greenhouse gas. Now, for the first time, it's melting.
The permafrost is obviously starting to break down. It's melting. We're seeing a change. We don't have any precedent really for this that science can sort of work from. We know there's a lot of carbon in the permafrost. It's very old. It's been there a long time. Some of it's in the form of methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas.
If these gases are released, they could dramatically cut short the amount of time we have left to act. Another big store of carbon is the ocean itself. So far, it has managed to soak up CO2, but there are signs this system is weakening. It's growing more acidic, killing marine life and changing its basic chemical makeup.
We will be shifting the ocean simply from terms of its chemistry into a different state than we've seen for a long, long time.
The ocean's chemistry is hidden from us, but there's no ignoring the tracts of rainforest disappearing on a daily basis.
When you get into the tropics, I think we're seeing projections from our models that are quite worrying. If the Amazon forest really does dry out, as some models suggest, then the rainforest is probably unsustainable, at least with the area it currently occupies. The bottom line is still it's a huge risk factor, isn't it? I mean, if we can't even tell you how the rainforest and the Amazon will survive, you know, are you going to take the risk? I mean, are you just going to go ahead anyway? The risk may make it happen worse than we think, but what we already know is bad enough.
Perhaps it's because we take our relationship with the Earth for granted that we are so slow to act. Internationally, we're beginning to wake up to the idea that our business-as-usual attitude will no longer work. But we need to find ways to translate that into action.
We've burnt half the oil and gas on the planet, and burning the rest at the same rate doesn't seem such a good idea. In fact, in order to avert catastrophic disaster, we need fast, immediate, and sustained reduction in our emissions, changing a lifetime of oil dependency habits. Is this even possible from where we are now?
The whole issue can seem overwhelming. Climate change can appear just too big to deal with, and it's natural to act with disbelief and denial. But climate change isn't something in the future, it's here. We may get to suffer storms and droughts, but for hundreds of millions in the third world, climate change means crop failure, starvation, flooding, economic migration, and refugee camps. For us, climate change may be a quality of life issue, but it's also now a human rights issue, with the developing world paying the price for our lifestyle.
We're already seeing devastating cyclones in the Far East. Thousands and thousands of Bangladeshis killed there in last November. Didn't really make an awful lot of headlines in the paper. If it had been thousands and thousands of Americans that were killed, it would have made a much bigger impact in the papers and in the media. So we have this imbalance between the poorer people who are the most vulnerable and the rich world, who I suppose have the most money to adapt and to mitigate against the worst excesses of climate change.
I think the debate will inevitably hot up. The science debate is becoming much more interesting and much more vibrant, and it really is heating up. The debate on policy is also heating up. I think this is very noticeable. There is a groundswell of feeling among people discussing policy measures.
We must never think it's too late. The thing is that we know some further change is unavoidable. So we have to sort of set ourselves a strategy to manage the unavoidable, but to avoid the unmanageable, if you like. And if we allow temperature to go too high, if we add too much greenhouse gas to the atmosphere, then I fear that we're going to get into that unmanageable regime. And we're then going to be faced with a world in which which probably just would not support the current population on the planet, actually.
I think there are many people making huge sacrifices already to combat climate change, and I feel it's admirable. I feel that they're making a big difference by their examples, and they're showing that what they do has an effect. I think it is colossally unjust that they should be making this effort when swathes of the population get off without even having to bother themselves one bit about the issue and are using this free atmosphere as if it was just theirs for the using.
In a sense, it challenges us because we can make nice statements about, being nice to people in Africa, equity between different countries, sustainable futures for our children. But the issue of climate change is going to challenge us to put our money where our mouth is.
So the science debate is well and truly over, and the public debate begins in earnest. But we're still far from public opinion reaching the tipping point for action. So much of what we know about this subject is constantly changing and shifting like a moving target. The lack of a carbon levy in the last budget means we have missed the opportunity yet again to bring in the only mechanism that our experts have told us would make a difference.
Without a carbon levy, I think the prospects are poor. And if we don't give ourselves the price signal, and if we don't recycle the money back to the people who paid it to do more abatement, we won't have the money and we won't have the incentive. So I'd be very surprised if we meet our targets without the levy.
As we enter 2008, we can expect more extreme weather events. By now, we should be beyond talk and taking action to solve this problem. Only time will tell if we can do this, and it's only time we don't have much of.
Even though we've made steps towards it, we are not really tackling the issue, and there are many people who are in disbelief of any future problems, and therefore they're being apathetic, and that is not the right way to go.
I think we're closing the gate too late now. We should have been doing this years ago. You know what I mean? We're trying to save, and people are more interested in saving money, I think, at the moment.
I think it's highly unlikely we're going to fix anything.
The whole world talks about it, right?
Well,
almost the whole world.
I'm worried about the increased flooding. I'm worried about my kids' future. I'm worried about temperatures, fires. There's more and more forest fires every year. And extreme weather conditions, that's my main worry.
I think everyone's kind of become more aware of their carbon footprints and food miles and all these kind of issues, but I think more definitely needs to be done.
We've only a promise to introduce the levy sometime before the end of the programme for government. We now know from December's meeting in Bali and the resulting commitment to urgently look for worldwide solutions that no nation can afford to stand on the sidelines of this issue any longer.